Hey guys, Jackie with Famish Farm, and I'm back with another look at our hurdle project to make a fence out of these rustic wooden panels. I've found a new way to do it with less waste. I'll have everything you need in the description down below with a cut list. It's super simple. Take two pieces of 2 by 2 by 8 pressure treated lumber. Take one of those. This is going to become the top and the bottom of your fence panel. Cut it in half at 48 inches. Make sure both pieces are exactly 48 inches or whatever measurement you want to use. Then you're going to drill half-inch holes at 4 inches, 14 inches, 24 inches, 34 inches, and 44 inches. Make those half-inch holes a good inch deep. That should do it. Now, I've got a big selection of down branches. This is from trees we took down, and I'm trying to use up this big pile of tree debris by making this screen. So most of my branches are going to fit into these holes with just a little bit of whittling, just fine. If you have a larger tree, larger branches that you want to use for this project, like think 1.5 inches and greater, then you're going to need thicker wood than 2 by 2 by 8. You might want to consider using 2 by 4 and a much thicker drill bit. Now take the other 2 by 2 by 8 and cut that into 32-inch pieces. One stick, 8-foot stick of lumber will create 3 of these pieces. You'll have one extra 32-inch piece. This is now the sides of your fence. I say fence because that's what I'm going to use it for. You may make a decorative screen. Now take 5 of the straightest branches you can find, and I do want to emphasize that straight with no little twigs coming off them if you can. If you have willow, it's perfect for that. You're going to cut the end, the thick end off so it's flat, and then measure up 33.5 inches and make a cut. You're going to need 5 of these. In my case today, I've already got one of them prepared, so I'm just making 4 cuts. You'll see here that these branches that become the uprights, in my case, are not tall and straight and perfect. They're anything but that. But you're going to use what you've got. In my case, I'm using up that tree debris, and I just tried to pick 5 that looked pretty good. You're going to want to make sure that the both ends of this branch, or in my case, I'm calling it an upright, fit in your half-inch hole. So whittle that down until it fits, and then check both ends of the branch or your upright so you know that they fit. In my case, some of these were over 1 inch thick. So I decided that using a chisel to chisel off like the last 1.5 inches, 2 inches of the end of the twigs or these branches would be quicker than trying to whittle it off. You do you. And if you have any suggestions to make this easier, this is rather time consuming, but all in all, it was just another fun part of the project. None of the branches I used were less than 1/2 inch thick, and none of them were greater than, say, 1.25 inches. So just remember, the thicker they are, the more you're going to have to whittle them down to fit in that half-inch hole. When you've got your 5 branches done, both the top and the bottom, whittled down to fit in that half-inch hole, you're ready to start building. The easiest way to do this is to find a big flat spot you can work in. In my case, I'm working on the carport. You're going to assemble the top and one of the sides. So you're going to use exterior grade 2.5 inch screws. In my case, I just bought a huge box of them because I'm making 8 of these panels and possibly more. On each end, I'm going to go ahead and drill some starter holes for these screws. I just don't want the wood to split. Be sure these are exterior grade screws and zip those in, 2 on each side of the top. I promise if you're making multiple of these panels, you're going to get really used to staging things at the right place and the right time. I promise you, you'll know where to set your drill and your screws so it's ready for you at the next step. This is what it's going to look like when you're done with the sides and the top. Take your 5 somewhat straight uprights and just compare them to the edge of the wood here. So I'm laying them about a ½ inch down from the top and just making sure there's not any that are glaringly over long. Once you've done that, decide where you want each of your 5 sticks. I thought at first it made a big difference. It doesn't really. Pick where you're going to put them and go with it. My tip at this part is to stick these, jam these all the way into the top as far as they will go. And once you've done that, then bring the bottom piece over and just take a look and make sure again that these don't look too long. After doing 8 of these, my next suggestion is to go ahead and screw in one side of the bottom, just with one screw. You don't even have to put it all the way in, just enough that it will hold. This part is very finicky. If you've ever made a ladder, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. You just have to make sure that every one of the uprights is seated in the upper portion and the lower portion while screwing in the sides. This took, on a good one, it took under 10 minutes. On many of them, it took me about 20 minutes to get this part just right. Here's a look at a second panel that I'm working on the uprights, just to give you an idea of how much fiddling around this takes. One of the things that I started doing toward the end is I would cut the branches down to about 33 1/4. But I will tell you that on the last panel, I had several of the uprights when I was, say, a third of the way done weaving, that the uprights poked out. And on the very last panel, it poked out enough that I maybe should have started over from the beginning, but I didn't. I just worked with it and made it work. Don't cut them down unless you absolutely have to. Part of the 20-minute procedure was that I would get up and walk over to the chop saw and take 1/8 of an inch off here, 1/4 of an inch there, and it was just a lot of back and forth to the saw. So I thought that was perhaps saving me time, but in the end, I think it created more work in the weaving process. So keep them 33 1/2 inches long, cut them down only as you need to. You'll see me here on this one. I'm really concentrating on this back corner. The one side is screwed in with one screw, and I've still got a gap of about 1/4 inch. So I'm trying to figure out which of these uprights is too long that's preventing me from closing that 1/4 inch gap. And eventually I do figure it out. Then just be sure that you've got 2 screws in each of the bottom parts. I'll finish 2 screws on the one side and then go back and put the second screw on the other side. Now it's time to bring on all those dead branches. Oh, and it should be apparent by the end of this that if you have straight, nice, smooth willow, use that. But if you don't, you can make it work. In this part of the video, I'm going to show you some tips for weaving these branches in and out of the uprights. And I'll hopefully be able to show you some reasons why some of the choices that you make as you're gathering these branches and building the frame are important. So it's not rocket science, guys. You're just weaving in front, behind, in front, behind, in front. Just alternate back and forth. Now, I will tell you, you want to keep those garden nippers close by. And if you've got a big pair of loppers, if your branches are thicker, that's absolutely a must have. The quickest way to get started is to grab the thin part of the branch and start with that. The thinner part of the branch is easier to weave in and out. There's a lot of tension that builds up on these uprights, as you can see. Oops. First, if that happens, don't worry about it. Just keep on weaving. Go ahead and start from the other end and keep going. Second, if you have a big problem with breakage, it was suggested to me that you might want to soak the branches. I didn't do that because it wasn't a big problem. And number two, I just didn't like the thought of the mess created carrying branches in and out of the bathtub. We're going to start the weaving process. And if you think about it, you want to start a thick edged branch on the left side. And then the next one, you want to start the thick end branch on the right side. So theoretically, you'll have a thick end, then a thin end, a thick end, and then a thin end. And that's if you had branches that were long enough to fit the whole frame and that didn't break. That wasn't to be the case frequently in my work here. If you have willow, that's a total game changer because those smooth, straight branches, you can do whatever you want with them. The other thing is when you press down and kind of consolidate your weaving, tighten up the weave, if you will, the amount that you do that will vary on a couple factors. It's aesthetically, what do you want it to look like? My desire here was a very rustic looking fence, and this is just to keep a 10-pound dog from wandering into the front yard. So I'm not as concerned with it being tight. The other thing was my branches are very variable in thickness. They range from, say, an eighth of an inch to an inch and a quarter. So that's a huge difference when you're weaving over a 4-foot span. Whereas if you have willow and there's maybe only a quarter-inch difference in the size of the branch, that's going to affect your final look. My gaps are probably no more than 2 inches, say. And if it was greater than that, I just wove in a couple of thinner pieces to kind of fill the gap. You do you, though. Make it look like how you want it. When I was picking out branches for this project, I tried to make most of the branches at least 4 feet tall. Most of them are towards 6 feet tall, but it's not absolutely necessary. At least if they're a couple feet long, you'll be able to weave through 4 of the uprights, and that's just about perfect. Thinner branches weave faster too, just so you know. I think I mentioned before, aesthetically, I like the thicker branches, but thinner ones are easier. Now, this takes quite a bit of arm strength and hand strength to do this actual weaving with the size branches I have, and also cutting off the thick and the thin end is something to consider. If you watch the video through to the end, you'll notice in several frames I step away, and that's just so that I can judge the courses. Are they straight, or do I need to make a correction? Do I need to squish one end down a little more? And it's just so you're keeping an eye. You want to keep these as straight as you can. Guys, I'm going to skip ahead to make my next point, and that's the comparison with regular branches to willow. Willow is pretty smooth the whole way across. If you have branches like these, you're going to find lots of little nodes and little areas where little twigs are jutting out. Those little places where they jut out create most of the problems that I had in making these panels. Here, can you see all those little twiggy areas sticking up? All of those little twiggy areas have to go by each of the uprights. And so that will add a lot of time if you're having to work the branch, and you can kind of twist the branch as you go to work those nodes around the uprights, but it does take time. So just keep that in mind. The other thing is that your uprights, in my case, also have those little nodes. And that will affect you when you go to compress the branches as you're pushing down from the top. If you encounter any nodes on the uprights, guess what? That may break your branch, or you may have to put pressure either on the front or the back of an upright to get past those nodes. Eventually, I found that the nodes on the uprights did wear off. It is a problem and it is something to be concerned about, but not as much of a problem as the branches that you're going to weave in and out. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the uprights came out as I was about a third of the way doing my very last hurdle. If that happens to you and you're that far along, don't worry, it's not going to go anywhere. There's so much tension with all the branches below it that it will hold just fine. However, when I found it, some of the branches had already poked out from either being in front of or behind the weave. So what I did is for that gap is I just wove in some smaller pieces to fill in the gap. But as you'll see from the pictures I'm going to pop in here, you'll see that one in particular is a pretty thick branch that is sticking out quite far. And I thought about using some twine to kind of pull that back into the upright. And I may do that. I'm not sure how long that fix would last, but it's something that I may do. I'll just have to let you know if it sticking out that far does create an issue or not. I'm always thinking of ways to improve projects I've worked on. And as I was thinking about this morning, I thought of another way to cut back on waste. So remember the second 2 by 2 by 8 that you cut into 32-inch sections? Well, how about instead of having that extra 32-inch section left over, how about if you just made your hurdle 64 inches in length and then 32 inches in height, plus the 3 inches from the other 2 by 2s on the top and the bottom. So it would add an extra 16 inches onto the length of the hurdle, which would be great. It would require that your branches are a little bit longer, somewhat. It would require a little more strength in lifting them. Although I'll be honest with you, these 48-inch panels are easily portable, which is one of the reasons that I'm making these. So I wouldn't let that stop you. And if I had to do this again, the next time I do it, it would be with 64-inch tops and bottom pieces, and then the side pieces being 32 inches. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it's given you some ideas and will get you started on your way to making your own woven hurdle to use as a decorative panel or a fence panel, whatever you choose. If you have any comments, please leave them down below and I'll try to answer them in the next video where I will start installing my decorative fence. The rest of the video, I'm just going to leave it on so you can see me completing or nearly completing this particular hurdle. And I run it at about 4 times speed. So enjoy it if you watch it. Otherwise, thanks for being here. Hey, I forgot one thing. I'm thinking about staining the frames like a dark ebony black color. What do you think? Leave them natural wood looking or stain? Let me know in the comments. Thanks, guys.